What's up, everybody? Michael here. I had a lot of people asking in the last week or so to play Dimir Shadow. Like, when are you playing Dimir again? When's the next Dimir video? And I wasn't really sure what kind of list I wanted to try out. Well, this list is by Magic Online user 10101989, also a member of the, I think it's like the Modern Meta Core Discord, something like that. So if you want to go talk to the creator of this list, then you can definitely find them there. But this is a list that they've been doing extraordinarily well with online recently, not only in like challenges and paper matches as well, posting 5-0 results, just huge amount of success. So I figured I would run it through its paces a little bit, see how the list played out for me. Some of the notable differences from the list I've kind of been developing are 2 copies of Tainted Indulgence. Important to note, this is in addition to the 4 copies of Consider. So I like that they've kept the 4 Consider, or they're using the 4 Consider. They found success with it. And the Tainted Indulgence is an addition instead of a replacement of that. Cut down to 3 copies of Drown in the Loch instead of 4 to go up to the full 4 copies of Archmage's Charm, 4 copies of Murktide, Stubborn Denial over Spell Pierce, running 3 Fatal Push instead of 4 with 2 Dismember instead of 1. This could be really good against a lot of like the scam decks running around where Fatal Push might not be able to kill a what's it called? Undying, Affected, Grief, or Fury, but Dismember can. So we'll see if that plays out. I like the one dressed down in the main. 19 lands. I usually find myself like I'll have trouble getting mana screwed in this deck a lot, which is why I went up to the 20th land, but we'll see how it plays out. In the sideboard, we've got some cool stuff like a Turok, a Shieldred's Edict, the 4th Fatal Push, a couple copies of Grafdigger's Cage, really good against the scam decks. We've got 2 Flusterstorm, a 3rd Stubborn Denial on the board, 2 more Dress Down, 2 Mystical Dispute, a Subtlety. So we'll see how a lot of this stuff plays out. There's a bunch of cards here that I have not tried out in a Dimir list, and I'm interested to see like how they do. I have not tried Shieldred's Edict in any deck yet. I haven't played Subtlety in a Dimir list. I haven't played Grafdigger's Cage. So, yeah, nothing to do but get rolling. So, round number 1. I believe we find ourselves winning the die roll. I think. Yeah. So, win the die roll. Opening hand. Double Murktide's a little rough, but we do have like a counter spell, fetch. We're able to fill up our graveyard pretty quickly to maybe get a Murktide down. Even if it's not a huge Murktide, just the fact that it's a Murktide at all is a lot of times is like strong enough to control a little of the tempo of the game. So opponent leads on a turn 2 Hedron Crab with a land. We've got the Fatal Push, so I don't feel too bad here. Now that we know it's against Mill, they're going to be filling our yard for Murktide Regent, so that makes this double Murktide keep look a lot better. They do have a main deck Spell Pierce. I was not expecting that. I was expecting like Crab hold up Fatal Push, but Spell Pierce was not on my radar. But either way, we get Shadow down. We could hold up Counterspell, but I'd rather just go ahead and get like the pressure of the Murktide. Because we've got this high CMC list with Murktides and Street Wraiths and stuff, I'm not so worried about Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I more just want to like overload the board so that Drown in the Loch and Jace aren't as effective. So we get Murktide. We find a Dismember, so we're able to take out that crab. They find another crab. We'll go ahead and try to counterspell that. We could have played the second Murktide last turn, but I really don't want to like tap out and open up both of my Murktides to removal spells. So that's why I was kind of leaning on holding up the counter spell instead of going for the Murktide, or the second Murktide, I mean. The opponent tapped and just went like double Drown in the Loch on my Mercs. Kind of game over. But now we've gotten to untap with an 8/8 Murktide. We've got Counterspell back up. Visions is just cycling itself, so we don't really care about that. I thought about actually letting this Tasha's go because we do still have 2 Murktide Regents in the deck, so there's a very low chance it's going to hit 20 cards. But decided just to fire off the counter spell because, hey, we got it. Might as well use it. Can't take it to sideboard with us. Game number 2, sideboarding against Murktide, usually boarding down on like some Street Wraiths, maybe some amount of spot removal depending on the list. Boarding up into any copies of like Flusterstorm, Mystical Dispute, Spell Pierce, extra Stubborn Denials, any of that stuff. From time to time, someone will ask like, hey, do you think about boarding up to 70 cards post board? And personally, I'm really strong about not wanting to do that because it just dilutes your main game plan really heavily. And usually your main game plan is enough to beat mill. So all you're really doing by mulling up or boarding up to like 70 cards is lowering your chances of just doing your actual straightforward game plan. All right, so I had the opportunity to play out a Murktide here as a 7/7. I probably could have. I was kind of thinking I wanted to counter something, and if I waited till next turn, I could play out the Murktide and hold up the counter spell. But honestly, there's not a whole lot they could do outside of maybe end of turn fraying sanity, untap, like crab, land, drown. That's a very specific set of draws that they need to have. But because we just went with this route of Murktide plus Drown, we get to counter Tasha's, hit for 7. I want to start like working through these Drowns pretty quickly, mainly so if my opponent has like a Surgical Extraction, they don't get to just take multiple cards out of my hand with that. It's like if I use all my, like one Drown first and then start Archmage's Charming everything, then maybe they have an Ensnaring Bridge or something that they really need to resolve, and they get to Surgical my Drowns and then cast the Ensnaring Bridge, and I put myself in a lot of trouble. So I'm just trying to like diversify my counter spells in hand so I'm not wrecked by something like that. So this is match number 2. We're on the play again. Keep a 1-lander, but we do have a couple considers. Just really, really hoping to not miss this second land drop. And get there. Lucky us. Decide not to play the Shadow. Opponent led on a Scalding Tarn with no companion, so I was assuming some kind of Murktide deck. But then they untap with a Xander's Lounge and get a Rogran Triumph, so it's some sort of like 4 or 5 color pile, probably some Leyline Binding deck. I'm kind of hoping it's like Rhinos because I've got these Fatal Pushes sitting around. But then they binding my Murktide, which is obviously very bad for me, but finding the fetch land means we do get a Shadow hold up counterspell, so slightly less bad. Still not great for us. We don't really know what we're up against. We just know they have 5 colors and Leyline binding, so I'm hoping that I can find some more lands, hold up double counterspell instead of just 1. Like, still no idea what they're doing. I'm assuming they're not elementals because there's no Kahira. So creativity. Luckily, with like the Fatal Pushes and the counter spells, we do have like a couple layers of interaction against creativity. Find another land. Perfect. So now we do get to hold up double counter spell or like Archmage's Charm, steal a token plus counter spell. I'm just kind of banking on my opponent not having like double Lightning Bolt. So we counter a Prismari command. That Prismari command was draw 2, discard 2, make a treasure. But I don't want them to have a treasure while I've got a Fatal Push. So end up countering that. Sideboarding against creativity, dropping a lot of the spot removal, bringing in like Engineered Explosives, the extra stub, Flusterstorm, stuff like that. Just trying to set myself up for whatever interaction I can. I did not want to Thoughtseize on turn 1 because my opponent had the untapped fetch, and if they just got a Veil of Summer, I put myself in a pretty bad spot. So instead I wait till turn 2. They end up getting a tap land, so I'm able to Thoughtseize them, stub the Veil, See that they have a pretty weak hand, just a prismatic ending, lightning bolt, archon, a couple lands. We do have the choice of going shields down here a little bit to get the Murktide. Like we've got the stub, but if our opponent has EOT Leyline Binding into untap like Foothills for token creativity, not a whole lot we can do about it. But the sooner we get this Murktide down, the sooner we can untap with multiple spells backing it up. So it's kind of, in my opinion, worth the risk of like, let's go ahead and fire off this Murktide. But it makes a token, end up conceding there. So I'm assuming that they were just drawing dead and the Murktide was going to kill them before they were able to get down Archon. So this is round number 3. Opening hand was 1 land, pretty bad. Second land, we threw back a Death Shadow because like we're a ways off of it being live. So we're just going to hold on to counter spells and stuff. Oh boy, Tron. Good old Tron. Counterspell is Sylvan Scrying. We see our opponent's only got 1 Tron land, so that's really good for us. Means we do have maybe a little breathing room. Just counter anything that says like find a Tron land. There's a second Tron land, so there's a bunch of rocks. I thought about countering the Relic, but I figure I can get enough stuff in my yard right here to get the Murktide online without needing to counter the Relic. So I'm just going to like jam this Murktide and say go and hope it can get there. Like we're going to have a rough time against Tron game 1 regardless. But we know our opponent does have a mine in hand. So they have Tron. They've got Cityscape Leveler able to take out our Murktide there. We've got to counter the Cityscape Leveler because I don't have a good way of getting it off the board. Unfortunately, it does have an ability that when you unearth it, it gets haste and you can attack in and exile another permanent. But at least now I've got Dress Down, so I can actually like dress down the Cityscape Leveler after it comes back, loses haste, doesn't get to attack, exiles itself at the end of turn. But opponent searches up a Sanctum of Ugin and then just like doesn't play it or the Leveler. So I don't know if they were trying to play around something. But they're going to go for the Leveler here. So as soon as they go into combat, we will get the opportunity to dress down the Leveler. So it loses haste. Doesn't get to make us blow something up. Draw into a counter spell is fine. Map would have been scary if they could get a Blast Zone, but they've already played a land for turn. So instead, we just get to go to our turn and like untap and swing for lethal. So I don't know why our opponent took that turn off with the Leveler. I don't think it would have ultimately mattered, but obviously you never know. Sideboarding against Tron, boarding in like Flusterstorm, any sort of like artifact or enchantment interaction I can find, but honestly, like outside of just more counter spells, there's not a lot that we have access to. I'm just hoping to be somewhat proactive here. Boarding out all those spot removals. So we do find a couple of Thought Seizes. We're able to snag away a Karn and a Ancient Stirrings. Our opponent cracks their map and gets a tower. So I'm thinking that they've got the other Tron land and they just wanted like a second tower. But it looks like they misclicked and accidentally got the tower instead of the third Tron land. I don't know their hand, so I don't know like how much this did or didn't matter. All I can say is I've got Thoughtseize. I didn't tap off of Archmage's Charm. So if opponent did have a fairly weak hand, like we did have interaction for payoffs at both stages. So you got to make the call yourself as to whether or not this win was halfway legitimate or not. But anyway, according to Magic Online, we're 3-0 going to round number 4. So take it with a grain of salt. Reasonable opening hand. It's a little bit slow, but we are on the play again. We've got Tainted Indulgence to help find a little bit of removal. Opponent's got to turn 1 Arboreal Grazer, so Tron, or not Tron, Amulet Titan. Amulet Tron. We'll go to our turn, find a shadow, so we do get a threat down if we want it. Which I believe we do, because we don't have a counter spell to counter anything, so... Usually, turn 1, I don't really like cycling Street Wraith if I'm not looking for something or trying to find something specific. Which obviously, like, a Thoughtseize is good, but in the blind game 1, Fetch, Shock, Wraith, Thoughtseize is just like game over. So I kind of don't want to commit that much if I don't have to. Here, we made the attack because I don't think my opponent's going to block. They've already seen Street Wraith. We're attacking with a 3/3 Shadow. And then going to our turn, we're holding up Archmage's Charm because if they Summoner's Pact for a Titan, then we can just counter the Titan like we did. They have to spend their next turn paying for Summoner's Pact this upcoming turn. So we kind of get free reign to just get our threats down, get a board presence, and then we can go back to like holding up mana next turn. But because of paying for the pact, we know they can't drop a Titan on us that turn. Attack in. Opponent says no blocks, so we go for the Tainted Indulgence in case we find a Dismember or another Street Wraith or something. We don't have the shock lands available to fetch and shock twice for lethal, so we just got to attack through, hold up Archmage's Charm. Opponent ends up scooping. Guess they just drew dead. Sideboard bringing in like Dress Downs, bringing in an EE, boarding out a Murktide because of like Bajuka Bog, stuff like that. Keep a really good proactive hand, just Thoughtseize, couple shadows, fetches, Street Wraith, Shieldred's Edict. So we're just going to try to get on the board as fast as we possibly can. Thoughtseize away our Boreal Grazer. Opponent top decks a Dryad, so not great for us, but we do get to take the Titan, leave them with just a Growth Chamber in hand. We've got Shadow. We've got another Shadow in the wings. We've got a Shieldred's Edict. We just need to, like, stem the bleeding for a turn, which obviously is rough when your opponent's got Teleria West and now a Summoner's Pact in hand. So, all right. So let me talk about this one real quick. I could Shieldred's Edict the Dryad Arbor. Just do that, attack for 4. And my opponent can't play a Titan next turn because they can't get up to 6 mana. That was like the level 1 play. I really think that in this case is the playing to not lose line instead of the playing to win line. The playing to win line, I think, is getting or fetching, shocking, or not fetching, shocking. Consider, find a land or find a Thoughtseize to take the Summoner's Pact. If I find a land, I Shieldred's Edict the Dryad, attack with however big the shadow is, and then next turn I can hold up Archmage's Charm for the Titan. If I don't find a land, then hopefully I found a Thoughtseize. If I don't find a Thoughtseize, I don't find a land, I don't find a Stubborn Denial, then I'm probably in a lot of trouble. But we do find a Dismember, which means I can still kill the Dryad, attack him with the Shadow. So I think I had a reasonable enough amount of possible draws off of that Consider that I feel kind of comfortable making that play of, hey, let's just like blind draw here instead of going for the Edict, because I think the Edict just doesn't do enough to like get the game over with. So if you disagree, more than happy to have that conversation. Leave a comment down below if you think that that was completely wrong and Shieldred's Edict's the only way to go. But again, I'm very much a fan of lines that like play to win instead of just like playing to survive, because a lot of times it's a very, very thin margin. So just my thoughts there. But like I said, we find the Dismember. So we get to attack in for a decent chunk. We know that they can't play a Titan this turn. So they're more than likely just going to be like chump blocking with Urza Saga. We don't find the land, but we do find a counter spell. If we didn't find the counter spell, we'd just be like holding up Shieldred's Edict for the Titan. But since we find the counter spell, we can do kind of the same thing we did last game. Let them resolve the Summoner's Pact and then hopefully counter spell afterwards. Because they have to play their land first to get the mana, we know they can't have a Cavern of Souls. So we're just going to counterspell Colossus, and they cannot pay for a pact on their next turn. So awesome. 4-0, 4-0, 8-0, going to round number 5. Lose a die roll. Reasonable opening hand. We've got some draw power. We've got a removal spell. We've got a Hammertime opponent. Clearing Saga, or clearing aid into Urza Saga. Well, let's see if we can find like some interaction or something. Watery Grave's no good. Thoughtseize is fine. We've got Dress Down to deal with like Saga tokens. Thoughtseize is going to take Blacksmith skill because I don't want my opponent to be able to save a Saga token after a Dress Down or before Dress Down. So find a third land. We're just going to pass with Dress Down here, hoping that our opponent like makes a token, untaps, makes another token. But here, if they do have like a another Blacksmith skill, then we could Dress Down and in response to the Blacksmith skill, Fatal Push the token. So we're pretty covered there. But either way, we get to deal with a couple threats there. Now we can just get down Murktide, hold up Fatal Push. I do want to point out, I saw Shining Shoal in my opening hand. I guess to me, I'm kind of like, yeah, I've seen that now. Now it's no big deal. I saw it actually in a friend's match against Hammertime earlier where they had like 4 copies of Emiria, not the land, but the like 7-mana sorcery. The dual face card that you can play face down as a white source. They had like 4 copies of that. And so when I saw Shining Shoal, like immediately it was, oh, it's one of these Emiria builds. Shining Shoal's been showing up a lot in these mono white humans lists recently. But either way, we get down Murktide. We've got Fatal Push up. Next turn, we've got like Push plus Drown. So a lot of interaction on our side. Sideboarding against Hammer. Board out some Thoughtseizes, board out some Wraiths, boarding in like EEs, the extra Fatal Push, the extra Stubborn Denial, stuff like that. Here, decide to turn 1 Fatal Push the Esper Sentinel, which I hate doing, but I don't want to just like give them tax effect or more draws every turn. Had Shieldred's Edict. I thought about just edicting this Stoneforge. They went and got a hammer. I was kind of like, okay, maybe I should edict this, but I really want to find a third land. And if they get Cauldra, I can edict the Cauldra, so I'm not like dead in the water to that. This, I think, was a punt on my part. So my opponent floated mana with their Saga and went to, or got ready to go tutor. I decided to go ahead and crack this EE to take out the construct. I don't think there was any reason for me to crack this EE. I think I should be completely fine just taking a hit and hold up Archmage's Charm. And if my opponent like doesn't do anything relevant, if they just hit me, then I can steal the construct into turn. If they do something relevant, like maybe cast a I don't know, a Pure Steel Paladin, then I can counter that. But I was like, oh, take an artifact off the board, kill a construct. It doesn't have summoning sickness, whatever the case may be. And they ended up having a second Stoneforge to go get a Cauldra, which they can go ahead and put into play. So even though I have the Edict to take care of that on my turn, I just like gave up 5 points of damage that I really didn't need to. And kind of started putting myself on the back foot here. So I play Shadow, plan on Children's Editing the Cauldron. Then they followed up with a Pure Steel and a Hammer. So yeah, like pretty solid chance we weren't winning this game anyway. But if I had not gone for that EE blow up, then I would have at least been able to like uh, counter the second Stone Forge. They wouldn't have a Cauldron, and then maybe like dismember the Pure Steel. Um, so definitely my mistake there. Game 3 of note, I did bring in the subtlety for this game because I was like, all right, I want to interact with a Stone Forge or something on turn 2 if I happen to find one. Thoughtseize turn 1 takes Pure Steel, so I know they've got this Stone Forge. They've got a Blacksmith skill. They go ahead and get Cauldron, which is fine because I can just kill the Stone Forge now. So the Cauldron is just like a stranded card in hand. We'll go ahead and get the Murktide down. See what happens. We got a 3-turn clock. Stone Forge for a Shadow Spear means they can get down a Cauldron of their own. And then we find, lo and behold, the subtlety. So reasonable clock. What I'm kind of hoping here is that my opponent would spend their entire turn putting in Cauldron. I would end a turn flash in subtlety, attack them for 10, put them down to 3, and the next turn, the only way they could put in Shadow Spear would be hit a land, pay 1 to cast Shadow Spear, and a 2 to equip it, and I could just stubborn denial the Shadow Spear when it came down, and that would let me crack back for lethal in the air. But then they found this Emiria, like I was talking about earlier, and they go ahead and bolt themselves to put this Cauldron in, and I guess hold up Blacksmith skill. So I get to say, cool, don't care about the Cauldron. I'm just going to flash in this subtlety, and it's going to give me 10 flying power in the air. So we end up taking the game off of that, finishing off the trophy. So let's talk about what I thought about the list real quick. I kind of mentioned some of my thoughts of stuff I was interested in going into the first match. Now finishing it, there were several times I wanted the 20th land. Like I kept one landers with Consider or Street Wraith and like had to kind of get there. And the deck did clearly get there several times, which is a huge benefit to the list. I do not think that you can afford to play a shadow list in modern that can't get there off of a one lander, which is one of the reasons that like I and judging by the list, 1010 is so picky and peculiar about like wanting Consider in the list. Like with Consider and Wraith, you have to have that draw power to hit the second land. Once you hit the second land, for the most part, you're kind of okay. You can bridge yourself to the third, but you just cannot have a hand with only one land and not get the second if you want to have any chance. But you have to be able to keep a significant number of those one landers because you're a deck that relies so incredibly much on one-for-one trading that if you're not keeping 7 card hands as often as possible, then you're already behind the ball. The 4 Murktides, to me, usually feels a little excessive. It didn't come up much this league, but a lot of times when I draw that second Murktide, I almost wish it were just anything else. The Tainted Indulgences, I think I cast one of them one time, and it was like draw 2 lands, discard a land or something. Like it didn't really have any significant impact on the game, but to each their own. I still want to try out some of the bigger draw spells, like I mentioned in the Discord. Maybe trying out Ancestral Visions, Search for Azcanta, just something to help like recoup some of that one-for-one trading and actually turn it into card advantage in the mid to late game. The second Dismember in the main, I think it's fine, but I got really lucky that I didn't run into any Ragavan matchups because that's where like you really missed that 4 fatal push in the main, or like the 4th drown in the lock. The sideboard subtlety was fine, even if it was just a 4 mana 3/3 flash flyer. I did miss Brazen Borrower a couple times. That's a card that I've definitely grown attached to in these lists, but that's more just like personal preference. Clearly, if we're able to go out and like trophy with this list, then this list has a lot going for it. And I wouldn't just change something because I just feel like changing it. Like I would need to have a significant reason because it's very tough to improve on 5-0, 10-1 in games. Like, not a lot of room there. The Shieldred's Edict was pretty good, getting to sack the Cauldra token, or the Germ token off Cauldra. The extra push in the board I like. As far as the sideboard goes, like Grafdigger's Cage is about the only thing that I'm kind of on. And it's mostly because like being on the draw against Scam, if you've got a Grafdigger's Cage, like they just beat that by having a turn 1 Scam effect. So I'm usually a little skeptical about anything that's like not interacting with a Scam threat that's already on the board. So in a matchup like Scam, I really want more like ways to kill the Scam creature. So like maybe an extra Shieldred's Edict in the board if you're looking that route, or something to that effect. But I'm usually less excited about like stopping the scam after they have a chance of scamming. The same way that I'm not a huge fan of like um what's the blue and black, the 3 mana sorcery that you name something and you get to exile like 4 copies out of their deck, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of those effects because against like Living End and Rhinos, 50% of the time you're going to be on the draw. And every time you're on the draw, it's too slow. They've already done their thing on the play. And there's a chance that if you try to play that on turn 3, they could just respond with like a Violent Outburst and the whole plan kind of goes to hell. Same thing with Grafdigger's Cage against Scam. Like 50% of the time, you're going to be on the draw, and they're just going to do the Scam thing. And you're sitting there with the Grafdigger's Cage, like, oh, what do I do? But if people start picking up our Croxa Heavy Grixis list, Grafdigger's Cage is pretty good at stopping Croxa, which is one of the best cards against this deck. Other note, I am really, really happy to see that 1010 did not play the basic swamp. If you've been around for any of our Dimir Shadow leagues before, you know that I absolutely hate the basic swamp. There's so many times that you have to like Murktide plus Counterspell on curve, or especially with a list like this with 4 Archmage's Charms, you really need to be able to go like Counterspell on 2, Archmage's Charm on 3, Murktide plus Counterspell on 4, Murktide plus Archmage's Charm on 5, and every single time you draw the basic swamp, it's going to screw that up. And then, like, if you do have a Blood Moon matchup, the basic swamp's not doing that much to help you. But if you're running like this, the 3 basic islands, then you can play through Blood Moon fairly well. I think if you're just dead set on having the basic swamp and you have to have it and you can't sleep at night without it, I would put it in the sideboard and bring it in for Blood Moon matchups. But I don't think you want it in the main where it can mess up your curve when you're trying to be proactive game 1. So yeah, that's the league. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Enjoyed the commentary and the voiceover. As always, if you are, please drop a subscription on the YouTube channel. It just lets you know whenever some videos go live. Doesn't cost you anything on YouTube. Otherwise, we'll have a link to like the Control Freak Discord and the Twitch stream down below. So if you want to go check out a live stream of a list like this or something similar, that's the way to do it. Yeah. Looking forward to the next video. Hope y'all enjoy this one. I'll catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.